work internationally to address IUU fishing, for example through monitoring, control and surveillance activities. And these include things like strengthening actions to be taken in port against suspected IUU activity, cooperating at the regional level to target high-risk activities such as vessels without nationality, cross-endorsement of officers to support an effective and efficient boarding and inspection regime, sharing of information and intelligence to provide a comprehensive picture of regional and global hotspots of IUU fishing activity. We also are involved in the agreement on strengthening implementation of the Niue Treaty on Cooperation on Fisheries Surveillance and Law Enforcement in the South Pacific. It's a really long name. This agreement establishes an innovative and effective legal framework for conducting voluntary cooperative fishing surveillance and law enforcement activities. We're also currently in the process of undertaking domestic ratification for this process. We're also engaged in regional fisheries management organisations to introduce and strengthen regional monitoring, control and surveillance activities, including vessel monitoring systems, high seas boarding and inspection regimes, and catch documentation schemes. These are in turn supported by processes such as IUU vessel listing and compliance monitoring schemes. Through regional fisheries management organisations, we are also working to improve the collection and use of reported data and to ensure consistent implementation of obligations across all of the members of these organisations. And lastly, but very importantly, we're involved in capacity building with our regional partners to enable them to also implement measures consistent with guidelines on port state and flag state measures, and also the measures that have been agreed in regional fisheries management organisations. So that's an outline of what we've been doing domestically and also regionally. I'd just like to touch upon some of the challenges that we see that face us when we are addressing illegal fishing. One of the challenges that we have found it difficult to address is taking action against stateless vessels that are operating illegally on the high seas. In this regard, we consider that international cooperation is going to be required if we're going to strengthen measures that can be taken against these vessels. We've also seen problems where the flag state of a vessel on the high seas is not party to one of the regional fisheries management organisations or to the UN Fish Stocks Agreement. In addition, we found that complex business and company structures make it very difficult to trace the beneficiaries of IUU fishing. We consider that we need to develop stronger monitoring, control and surveillance measures at the regional level, particularly through regional fisheries management organisations, and we need to improve our compliance with these measures. We've also found that it would be helpful if we had better cooperation from flag states in implementing consent, enduring consent arrangements, and because this would allow more timely action to be taken against vessels that are suspected of illegal fishing. We also consider that ratification and genuine implementation of key binding international fisheries management and conservation agreements is needed. These are existing measures and we think that we should use them where we have them. And in this way we could have more effective management of fisheries, and we could also ensure an internationally consistent approach to the prevention of illegal fishing. And we could also make it more difficult for the illegally caught product to enter the market. Thank you very much for allowing me to share Australia's thoughts on this. Thank you again to the Indonesian Embassy, and thank you.
Thank you, Kaya. Now the floor is open for Q&A, or maybe comments from the floor, or maybe you wish to state your opinions about illegal fishing or fisheries crime. I would appreciate a short and concise statement or question, so that everyone in this room will have the chance to express their views. There are several issues, I think interesting issues that have been put forward by our speakers today. For example, there was a suggestion to engage more the UN. The thought that illegal fishing or fisheries crime is really transnational organized crime. Maybe we can explore this further during our debate today. Anyone like to start? Vijay. Okay, let me start one question to the three panelists. There was an idea this is put forward by Mr. Kunar in his presentations on fisheries crime and IUU fishing. The research by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime and the Blackfish also suggested to unpack the term IUU fishing into two: illegal fishing, one hand, and then the unreported fishing and unregulated fishing, because illegal fishing and unreported and unregulated fishing, they have different issues, different problems, and also different solutions. As has been mentioned, that unregulated fishing might not be a crime, but illegal fishing certainly is a crime. On this regard, I would like to ask all panelists, how would you unpack this term IUU fishing, or maybe Mr. also propose to add one term instead of unpack the term IUU fishing?
Well, my first reaction is, why do we do it so difficult? It's that's always a question that pops up in my mind when I started the interagency project in Norway. The first year, every meeting, we started to discuss about IUU, and it was always the police that brought this up and said, where is our role in this picture? What is the purpose? How are we going to operationalize a term that even the experts have problems to understand? No, I'm frank about this. I have problems to understand everything, and it's so complex. It covers everything, absolutely everything, and it's so overwhelming that it is difficult to operationalize it. And that is the purpose of UNODC and of Interpol, is to bring this down on the ground so countries are able to cooperate and to bring these criminals out of business. So the issue is whether or not it's criminalized. Now, of course, you could divide up the IUU term, then you have to go to the FAO and get a consensus on that, and keeping in mind how much time that was spent to negotiate the definition of the IUU term, which is about 1 page, I think. And I think that then it will take maybe 10 years before we can start. On the issue of illegal, it doesn't have to be criminalized to be illegal. In Norway, we also have administrative sanctions for the petty types of illegal fishing, and that is sanctioned by different administrative means. But then we also have criminal sanctions. And that is what we have to focus on, the really serious stuff, the really, really serious stuff, and the complicated cases. And that's where we need to use the same mechanisms that we use to investigate any other type of transnational crime. Now, if you are going to investigate organized crime, if you're going to reach out to flag states that don't cooperate, well, one way of doing it is by mutual legal assistance, as we know from any other types of crimes. And I think what was quite interesting through the expert meeting on the Talk at Sea resolution that we had a few years ago was the issue of the lack of flag states to exercise their criminal jurisdiction over vessels. And I think that is an important distinction, because what I think that the Australian colleague said in her presentation was actually exercise of their fisheries jurisdiction. And that is something different. Because when you are talking to the authorities in the flag state, if you are talking with the authorities on issues of fisheries jurisdiction, then the requests usually go to the flag state administration. And many of the flag states that are used by illegal operators are outsourced to a third country, to a company in a third country. So if you were planning to talk with the authorities with that country, then you have to talk with some other authorities, and not the law office in London or in New York or in Greece or in Singapore. So, and that is the challenge. But if you send a mutual legal assistance request, then it's a communication between the justice systems. And the justice system is never outsourced to a law company in Singapore or in London or New York. And that is a huge difference. And we have never explored these issues. And this doesn't only involve fisheries crime, it involves all type of crime that is being committed at sea. Because you need cooperation from flag state. Either you are going to board a ship to look for drugs or illegal fish or human trafficking victims or illegal migrants, any type of crime. You need cooperation with the flag states. But the issue of criminal law enforcement at sea is an area that have been under discussed, and also it has not been developed yet, in my view, the same way as terrestrial-based crime. So we shouldn't just focus on the IUU and the illegal catching of the fish. This is much broader and much more important than that. It is about having the ocean in a more regulated way and to actually be able to respond to crime, whatever type of crime it is that is committed at sea. Fisheries crime is part of that, but it's not the only crime that is being committed at sea. And I believe that Indonesia here have had a very good example of that with the amount of human trafficking victims that are sold at sea between vessels. And we have known this for many, many years. This is not new. It's been there for at least 10, 20 years. I know this because I worked in the Coast Guard before. So this is not a new phenomenon. It has existed, but we haven't never looked at it from a crime perspective. And that is what I hope that we can change. If we do that, it will benefit all type of crimes that are being committed at sea, including fisheries crime. So therefore, I'm not in favor of trying to fit this into the IUU term. IUU is a fisheries management tool, primarily for the FAO. Fisheries crime is part of the bigger crime picture at sea that is under the mandate of UNODC. So that is my opinion about that case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. When we found through our analysis and evaluation, this is the modus operandi of IUU fishing in Indonesia. Some of them are covered by our fisheries law, but some of them are not covered by our fisheries law and covered by other legislation such as criminal code. And if we look at the modus operandi we found in Indonesia, some of them are threatened by criminal sanctions. But I think almost all of criminal sanctions are not categorized as serious crimes. There's only 2 years imprisonment, etc. So that's a problem. That's why the Indonesian court always impose very lenient sanctions, and very rare. It's imposed by the imprisonment, only fines, 200 million rupiahs and then 300 million rupiahs, something like that. So why we it's not a problem actually for Indonesia. Why we call it ayu fishing as a fisheries crime? Because most of them are threatened by criminal sanctions. So it is categorized under our legal framework as a crime, although it is not a serious crime. But I think I agree with the Gunnar, but we need to, we need to differentiate between ayu fishing and Gunnar mentioned fisheries crime, but we mentioned fisheries-related crimes. But I think there's no problem for Indonesia, as we are now about to amend our legislation, fisheries law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. I think our perspective would be similar to the perspective that you have put forward in terms of separating out the I, the you, and the you. This is not to say there aren't some challenges associated with the current framework we have. You've highlighted some of them, but we have found that it can also be quite effective. And so sort of making wholesale changes to existing regimes that we have been able to use might not be the best way forward. It also, as you've highlighted, is going to take a long time. So our approach would be more to look at the existing measures that we have at the moment, whether they be under the FAO or under the UNTOC or even other. We need to look more broadly as well, for example, under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, and look at how we can strengthen those measures, because there are always ways that we can be doing things better. And one way could be looking at where the illegal of the IUU could be better prosecuted or better managed. And then I think the next approach would be to identify the gaps that we have in our international regimes and to address these. So rather than making large changes to what we have, identifying where the gaps are and working to fill some of those gaps would be the way that we would see it going forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any thought or comments, question from the floor? Please, Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much both to the Indonesian Embassy and government for organising such a timely and relevant event, but also to each of the panellists for very interesting presentations. Can people hear me okay? All right. Just looking at one of the slides that colleague from Jakarta put up, I think that, and it's come out very clearly in the presentations, it's very difficult for any one country to deal with a problem that's now truly global in its dimensions, but even in specific cases such as the ones you highlighted, there are so many international jurisdictions in which this criminality is occurring in different forms. I'm struck that in that chart you presented a minute ago are many things that we find in other forms of transnational crime, such as people smuggling, trafficking, people trafficking, and indeed drug trafficking. It's a pattern of using gaps in the international system and the different legal systems that countries have, but also, to be frank, the different levels of commitment that different countries have to address these problems. In Southeast Asia and with Australia and New Zealand and to some extent the Pacific Islands, there has been real progress during my career, in the last 20 years anyway, in finding ways of working together, finding frameworks like the Bali process with trafficking and people smuggling, but in many other respects. And the progress is because governments realise that we have to all act together. It's a bit like water in a flood. It will follow the path of least resistance. The governments that are slowest to legislate or create effective enforcement, or perhaps don't give it the same priority, become part of the problem. Even if the problem is manifest in large-scale illegal fishing in the waters of Indonesia or in Australia, they are a part of the problem, and we need to find more ways of bringing them into the solution. I applaud the very active approach of the Indonesian government. I had the pleasure of one of my postings was in Jakarta in the late 90s, and I've seen that cooperation improve, grow and improve in a very encouraging way for almost 20 years. And I expect that to continue because it gives a very good example of a win-win mutual interests. Different countries, different problems, but working together we both gain. And it's the extension of that into, certainly regional and I think sometimes global understandings and a greater solidarity. That's where we can start to begin to be effective in prevention, because in the end, however much we prosecute, none of us have the resources, even the major powers do not have the resources to close down this kind of illegal activities in their own waters. It requires multilateral approaches. We have equipment, we have good regional organisations which we have found effective and able to develop with time, I believe, in the Pacific and to some extent in the Indian Ocean. But I think realistically, if we're really going to make progress, there are enormous losses, economic but also environmental. Indonesian tropical waters are, I believe, the most productive source of biodiversity in the ocean in the world. Runs around the equator, I believe that's the case scientifically. In the small Pacific Islands, which Australia works with closely on this, many of them with small populations, not a strong state apparatus, have extraordinary resources which are important for all of us, and they don't have the means on their own to deal with this major aspect of international crime. So I guess what I'm saying is that the problem is a lot broader than simply the states that are, if you like, the victims of IUU. It requires global, it's a very significant environmental and economic and developmental issue, and it's one which requires extending cooperation and looking at the matter in a global framework.
Thank you, Ambassador.
No, I think, thank you, Ambassador Saletsi. I think you confirm our concern actually. And the first one is strengthening legal framework in national, regional, as well as in the global level is very important to combat IUU fishing and or fisheries crimes. And second is international cooperation is very important. That's why, as mentioned by panelists from Australia, we just signed the MOU with your minister and with our minister 2 weeks ago, yeah? 2 weeks ago. And next week we'll be going to PNG to work together with the authority in PNG. And it is followed by our visit to East Timor-Leste, because that's our bordering countries actually. And after we visit 2 countries, and then we'll invite a colleague from Australia, from PNG and Timor-Leste to get together, how do we strengthen our existing cooperations to prevent and to combat IUU fishing. And another thing is strengthen the capacity of enforcement officers. Of course, it's really important. And the last thing, as we show it to you through 8 issues to prevent IUU fishing, it is important to introduce or to improve the fishery business governance, especially in Indonesian context, could be replicated in other countries as well.
Thank you. Our colleagues would like to, please.
Sorry, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Good to see you at Indonesia here in Austria. I'm glad to say that I'm happy that I'm not the only one that seems to be confused. I'm enlightened a little bit more based on the discussions of the panel. But I think, you know, one of the I guess most salient points I take away from the discussion here is that you know, a lot of member states that discuss this issue, or we try to discuss with them, are also very confused. You know, when we're talking about wildlife and forest crime, and for us it includes fish. And when they say that, they want me to explain to them what is a fisheries crime. Yeah, and it's been very, very difficult. This has been enlightening, but I'm still a little bit confused. And I think one of the things that should come out of here, and I'll talk about that when I speak later, is the need to, as Gunnar said, perhaps better define what it is we're talking about. Yeah, because I think if you don't understand what you're talking about, it's very hard to address it. And that goes along with a number of other issues. That's my comment, and I'll build on that a little later. But I have a question for our colleague from Indonesia, the chief of the task force. You know, the ambassador from Australia talked about international cooperation, and was also mentioned earlier. You've been so active recently, over the last several years, in an area that's very challenging for you. How have you found international cooperation? Because we know that, you know, a lot of the elements in that slide require that you discuss with other governments, you know, especially if you do investigations. So how have you found, I know you've taken your own unilateral actions to thwart the issue, but there's also a lot that should be done on the investigative side, you know, to really find out who owns these, you know, what they're up to, how much money they have, so we can then go after their assets. How have you approached the investigation side? Have you had lots of any significant success? And what would you say needs to be done to further the investigative side of the crime, on the fraud, on the money laundering, on corruption, on labor? Thank you.
Perhaps Gunnar can help me. 2 months ago, we arrest the vessels Silver Sea 2, and it is unprecedented arrest actually, because why we did arrest them? Because we use technology, VMS and AIS, and it's been also for such a long time. They did illegal fishing in our water and transship in our bordering country, and it is very difficult to find the evidences. That's why we invited a colleague from Norway with the help of Gunnar Stolvik and 2 experts on vessel tracking, monitoring, came to Indonesia and worked together with our task force and our investigators, indirectly, of course, indirectly. And now the minister launched already the case, and it's been under prosecutional stage now. So that's the evidence of the importance of international cooperation, bilateral cooperation between experts, Norwegian experts and Indonesian enforcement officers. Second, we have a forum between Australia and Indonesia, as you mentioned, and our lack of ability, we try to strengthen our ability to detect, and we try to compensate with bilateral cooperation with Australian friends. And 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting in Melbourne, and they shared information as a result of airborne surveillance, and we have followed it up, all the information. That's important. The lacking of ability to detect is compensated truly with strengthening our international cooperation. And also in the prevention side, that's the investigation side. When we develop policies to prevent IUUF through 8 issues we presented, we need experts also. So we went to FAO, and we went to UNODC, to our friends, and then we tried to invite them in our focus group discussion in Jakarta, 3rd week of November, to get their knowledge, to get their expertise to develop our internal policy. So the answer is yes, very relevant and very important to compensate our lacking of 3 A's: abilities to detect, abilities to respond, and abilities to punish.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Stoff.
On the issue of cooperation, I would like to give an example from Norway, because of course we are a bordering country to Russia, and we have had probably through the last 100 years actually, we have cooperated with Russia on the fish stocks. What I think is interesting is that the cooperation we have with Russia also shows how we have a distinction between what is more administrative fisheries management issues and what is criminal issues. Because we have, on a yearly basis, we have cooperation with Russia on how we allocate the fisheries quota, issues like that, which is a purely fisheries management issue. But we also have a meeting between the Prosecutor General of Norway and the Prosecutor General of Russia on fisheries crime. Because in Norway and Russia, it is a crime. So the legal systems fit together on that issue. And that is a forum that have existed for, I believe, for the last 20 years, where they actually discuss mutual cases, evidence that you need to share between those countries and so on. And the handling of evidence is very different from Norway to Russia. In Norway we have a very free legislation when it deals with the procedure on handling evidence, for example. So that is and that process is under the Ministry of Justice in Norway. I'm from the Ministry of Fisheries, Trade and Fisheries. So the management of fisheries resources is under my ministry. And now you might think, why am I here talking about crime? Well, it's because the Minister of Fisheries in Norway have a special agreement with the Minister of Justice that we are the coordinating body in Norway on fisheries crime issues. But it is still under the constitutional responsibility of the Minister of Justice when I'm talking about these issues. When I'm talking about IUU, then I'm talking on behalf of the Minister of Fisheries. So that is how we distinguish about this. And I think this discussion is very familiar with what I've experienced before. And I worked a lot on IUU fishing before, and there was always different workshops, but it's so big, it's so complex, it's everything. It is from how you manage the fish stocks and all into economic crime. It's so huge that it's absolutely, it's impossible to get to the bottom, to the root of the problem. So and that is why we believe that if we are going to work on these issues through the international organizations that are responsible for crime, we can't deal with everything, because then it's complete confusion. You have to focus on the crime. So just forget that it's fish, and just say, okay, this is criminalized. Well, then it's the responsibility of UNODC, and countries that are members of Interpol can use Interpol as a tool to connect with other countries in transnational operations. And I believe that's the way to deal with this. Now, the issues that we have here is whether we should use the same term as we use in another organization when dealing with the more management issues of the same problem. I believe that, well, actually my government believes that it's more clearer if we use different terms. It does exist on other areas. I believe in fraudulent medicines, for example, in the World Health Organization. They have also a very complicated term defining that work, while here in UNODC, I believe the term is trafficking in fraudulent medicine, I believe. And the same on human trafficking. You have the Human Trafficking Protocol of UNODC, but also you have the Forced Labour Convention in ILO. It overlaps somewhere, but sometimes you just have to live with that. And I believe we believe that that's the issue with this as well. And as Jorge points out, he's the head of the wildlife crime program of UNODC. Why can't we deal with fisheries crime as part of wildlife and environmental crime? Why is it so different? We don't think it is that different. Okay, there is some different legal aspects related, because this environmental crime is actually conducted at sea. But still, we don't look at this as that problematic. It will be problematic if Jorge is supposed to work on IUU fishing, because then he's stepping on the FAO area. And I don't think that we as member countries of both organizations, I think then we are creating a lot of extra work for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrich. I think I'd like to echo what my other two panelists, other colleagues have said. In terms of international cooperation, we have had some really positive experiences. Our Indonesian colleague has highlighted some of them, and our cooperation with Indonesia is really a highlight for us in how you can cooperate with neighbouring countries to really address these issues in a concrete way, but also through our relationships with neighbouring countries in the regional fisheries management authorities and other places. Having said that, in my presentation I outlined some of the challenges that we found in terms of working with other countries, and some of the things that we think that we could improve on internationally would be encouraging cooperation of flag state countries, whether it's through making sure that they are partners in some of these organisations, but also through encouraging greater will, I guess, to cooperate. You mentioned evidence, and sort of gathering information and getting information from other states is also something that can be quite challenging for us. I mentioned, for example, tracing company structures, working out what is actually going on, who are those responsible is something that we still think think we need to improve on. And also getting evidence in a timely way is something that we would like to improve, because often we're hamstrung in our operations because we just can't get the evidence quickly enough. And also in monitoring, control and surveillance, we've done a lot, but the sea is a very big place, and if you look at Australia, for example, we've got a lot of sea around us, and it's really challenging to cover that amount of territory. And so there are a number of people talked about cooperation there. I think that's really important. It's something that we can continue to improve on in terms of sharing information and sharing resources. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay. I recognize Costa Rica. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Please let me start by thanking Ambassador Budiman and the Permanent Mission of Indonesia for organizing this this group discussion, which certainly for my country and those around the table is quite important. I want to thank the panelists for their intervention. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. I actually have a question, again, with respect to cooperation, because although I certainly hope that we can mainstream illegal fishing, as a transnational organized crime, a country like Costa Rica, the truth is that, we can have a perfect legal framework if such a thing exists. But unless we actually have the capacity to implement it and basically implement it and enforce it, there isn't much point to it. Costa Rica has its marine territories 10 times its landmass, its continental landmass, and we simply do not have the capacity to patrol the marine territory. And I wanted to know, in your experience, how successful have you been in terms of, if you have any sort of joint patrolling agreements with neighboring countries, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the question would be for whoever the panelists.
For all of you.
For all of them. Okay. Let's start.
Particularly for countries that perhaps have very different capacities, when it comes to patrolling the territory.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Taking the floor again. I believe that the less capacity you have at sea, the more international cooperation you need. That's my opinion, and also the experience through the work through Interpol. What we have seen is that in recent cases where the flag state and also many of the coastal states involved had absolutely no capacity to involve, in spite of that, it have actually ended in prosecution. So how does that work? Well, it works with that you actually you need to connect with different countries and to share information and to bring in information and evidence. Because a ship always have to go into port somewhere. So what we did on one case was that we sent out a purple notice through Interpol, calling upon the world society to share information with Norway. And through that information gathering, it was possible to create a criminal case based on that. And then it's all about cooperation through the police channels. And if you don't have a cooperation agreement with other countries, and very often you don't, because these vessels are moving all over the world, and you might have 20 different jurisdictions involved in one case, then you have the framework. You have the UNTOC Convention. You have the how to write mutual legal assistance requests and so on. And that's and we have actually used these tools in some cases with countries that we never have any cooperation with. But somehow these vessels have some is under the jurisdiction of a country that we don't even have an embassy in. So we have a framework for international cooperation, and that's the reason why we believe that it's important to actually use it. So that's basically what, and also on the monitoring and surveillance. Also, our experience is that technology is so good now, and Norway too. We have a huge sea area. It's about 7 times the size of mainland Norway, and we have about 15 Coast Guard vessels that is going to operate there. And in the different zones, it actually takes, we are unable to cover the whole area, but we have good surveillance. And that is also something that you can share with other countries. So international cooperation, I think, is the key, but you need a good framework to do it within. Thank you.
Thank you. Gaia.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I think, thank you, Excellency, for your question. I think this is a really important question. It's one of the things that we certainly give the most consideration to when we're developing our approaches in this area. And that is to building the capacity of our neighbours, but also building our own capacity. And I think that one of the things that we found is that cooperation in terms of monitoring, control and surveillance can be done, and we have done that, for example, by cross-endorsing officers between countries and really kind of being involved in the nuts and bolts operationally, but also being a little pragmatic and realising that none of us have the capacity to monitor everywhere all at once. So it's also about talking to countries in our region about where the high risk or the hotspots are and cooperating in terms of targeting those activities or areas. But it's also about sharing information, and not duplicating efforts. So if we can effectively share information with our neighbours about what is going on, and then perhaps that reduces some of the burden that they may have in terms of monitoring, control and surveillance as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very limited ability to detect and to respond actually the potential violations, as we have a second largest coastline in the world, and we have very limited vessels to patrol our ocean, our seas, and that's why to fill up the gap, I think international cooperation is a must. The first one. The second, as a consequence of our president put up maritime sovereignty, sustainability, and prosperity as the highest priority. I think in 2016 we can improve our ability to respond mostly by adding more patrols and putting more budget in our state budget. So 2016, that's the program of our Minister of Marine Affairs and Fisheries. Second, I would like to say, I think I mentioned it in my presentation. 2 weeks ago, President Jokowi has already issued presidential regulation number 115, 2015, and President Jokowi established a presidential task force to combat IUU fishing, headed by the minister herself, and then her deputy is from Navy, from Coast Guard, and Marine Police. So at least now because coordination is very problematic in Indonesia. Now put it into one roof, one commander, one policy, so one budget to combat IUU fishing in Indonesia. So at least the problem related to synergy and lack of coordination could be solved by the establishment of the new presidential task force.
Thank you. I recognize Oman, please.
Can you have the microphone, please? Thank you very much for giving me the floor. First of all, my name is Yahya Al-Jugeshi from Oman Embassy. And thanks for the Indonesian Embassy to organize this very good meeting for to discuss the very important issue also. This issue also is very, very important to my country. And we have a committee, a very high level committee in Oman. It's dealing with this issue. But I have actually a legal question for Mr. Guna. It's about the national legislative. Okay, it's as you know, usually the criminal law for any country is not going beyond the territorial waters. It's not covered the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, for example. So, what's the legal solution to have a national legislative? It's covered the another marine areas like exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Business Recommender.
Thank you. I understand that you have a question about the different jurisdictions at sea and the legal regimes and how that fit with. Well, our approach is that there is always a criminal jurisdiction, but it's not always a Norwegian criminal jurisdiction that you have to deal with. Even in international waters, there is always a criminal jurisdiction. That's the flag state. There are some few cases where we talk about stateless vessels, but then according to the law of the sea, you have the possibility to exercise jurisdiction over that vessel. In Norwegian legislation, we have an opening to also exercise Norwegian jurisdiction on flagless vessels in international waters. And we have done that. We arrested the vessel that was stateless some years ago and arrested and brought it into Norway and treated it as a Norwegian vessel based on that. So, but the key to all of this is that, of course, that the legal systems fit together and that there is a sort of harmonization between the different legal systems, so it is possible to cooperate. And that's why also that we believe that it is important, the discussions that we have here and that we have had through UNODC is to have at least an understanding that it is possible to cooperate in fisheries cases also in the criminal justice system. And we have done that many times with Russia, obviously, because we have a close cooperation with them. We also have, which maybe also could be interesting for you to know, is how we deal with fines. Now, a fine in Norway is a criminal fine. So in many cases we give fines to foreign fishing vessels, but we have an agreement with the Scandinavian countries that if for some reason that one of the countries are unable to collect the fine, for example that the vessel disappears or flee from our zone, then those countries will collect it on our behalf. And that also includes the confiscation of the catch. Now the way we do it in Norway, when we confiscate the illegal catch, we confiscate the value of it. We don't confiscate the fish. So the value is determined, how much is it worth, and then we confiscate it, and then we put a fine on top of that. But of course there could be other criminal charges if it involves money laundering and different other issues as well. Now if we are unable to collect it, then one of our neighboring countries could do it. If that vessel or the company or some of those involved are in that jurisdiction. And I think it's interesting because this is one of the new possibilities that I would say that we haven't explored in the fisheries crime track. And particularly for countries that are unable to protect their whole area. So what happens if a vessel that fish illegally in Norwegian waters, we have proof that they have done that, but we are unable to catch it. And the fish is then on its way to Asia, to an Asian port somewhere. We still would like to have the value of that fish back to our country because it's stolen. It's a natural resource that has been stolen from Norway. And that is when you come into the issue of asset recovery. That is also one of the issues that I believe that UNODC is working on, that we think is also quite interesting. It's not enough just to stop the catch for being landed. We would like the value of the fish, because they will always be able to land it somewhere because of corruption and issues like that. But we would like the catch to be confiscated and that the value is returned to the owner, to the treasury of the owner. And that is something I believe that is very normal in all criminal cases of transnational nature. We just have to adjust our mind to look at fish as any other type of commodity that you can do crime with. So I don't know if that answered your question, but from our perspective, there's always somebody that have criminal jurisdiction. Not all jurisdictions are willing to cooperate, but keep in mind that the UNTOC Convention is the most highly ratified convention in the world. So even those problematic flight states that we know about, they are members of the UNTOC Convention. And they have actually an obligation to help us in those cases. But then we will communicate with a completely different part of the authorities if we are asking for help with the basis on the UNTOC Convention.
Okay,
Yeah, sure. This is a very interesting question and legally very technical and beyond me in many ways. But I'd like to highlight that it is a really important question because fish move and they move between these zones. So being able to know how to deal with activity in each of these zones is really important. And I think that what you said about there always being a jurisdiction that's the approach that we also take. And it highlights to me that we actually need to all be aware of all of the tools that we have in our toolkit that we can use. So there's the UNTOC, as we've mentioned, there's regional and bilateral agreements, there's the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and so we try as much as we can to be pragmatic and also a little clever to identify which is the tool that we can use the best given the location or the activity that's taking place.
Thank you. I recognize 3 persons would like to ask the floor. We have 10 minutes to go. I think I would please the 3 gentlemen to ask questions and then respond by the panelists. First, Namibia, please.
Oh, thank you very much, and I would like also to thank Indonesia for introducing this discussion. It's very important to Namibia, especially. I just want to ask a question regarding the illegal dumping of fish that was acknowledged as to. Is it the same as illegal fishing? And is it a crime? How do you find it? Because in Namibia we have also experiencing this illegal dumping of fish.
Thank you. Next to Indonesia, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the panelists for their comprehensive presentation on this very important issue. I certainly agree with all the panelists that no country can tackle this crime alone, this serious crime. So that's why international cooperation is needed. I echo what Gunnar has said, that we cannot just, of course, almost everybody here would agree that illegal fishing or fisheries crime, we would say that cannot be considered as a purely management fisheries management problem anymore, because we have now all the criminal phenomenon in reality, and I think that the illegal fishing could be in line with the definition of the transnational organized crime as defined in UNTOC due to its transnational in nature. So in this case, that also I would like to also agree with you that we should bring this issue and engage more in the multilateral settings, into the UN settings, especially in Indonesia. But the challenge is also very big because due to the historical negotiation that we have during the discussion in any fora, such as PCG, Doha Declaration, that the gap is still there. This issue is very political in some other countries. So it's difficult to bring this issue into this UNODC matter. So my question is that what is the approach that we should take, the concrete approach that we should take in order to raise awareness or to bring a mutual understanding in that we can have a recognition of this crime in the sphere of the DOC. Thank you.
Thank you. The last one, Mr. Ferdian, please.
Well, thank you very much. Just a quick question. I'm really very appreciative to what the speaker has been presented, and of course is giving more and more understanding on these particular issues. But my question is for Gunnar. I know that in your presentation you're mentioning a very simple definition, which is crime is, fish crime is considered crime because it has a negative impact on. I think this is very, very simple and all-encompassing definition. My question is, the point that we know we like to do is try to raise this issue from national level into a multilateral setting. I think there's no question of all from the discussion. And the point is, it's very easy to see that one, people doing the illegal fishing as a crime, it's very easy. But how to put it in the international context, that this constitute as one of the transnational organized crime. This is the more challenging than before. Do you think that by having the mutually agreed or generally agreed definition can solve the problem of highlighting this issue at multilateral levels? I understand the challenge is very high, the challenge is very heavy, because I try to make analogy to what happened with the issue of terrorism, for example. Everybody knows what activity terrorism is, but when they try to define what the terrorism is, they fail. That's why we doesn't have any single treaty on terrorism. That's because of the definition. So how do you see that this idea will at least have some resemblance into the efforts for us to bring this on the terrorism? Or we can also, following the road that also available in discussing terrorism. So far we doesn't have any single treaty on terrorism, but in fact there are some treaties that consider if one of these treaties are met, is considered act of terrorism. So the point is now is try to create a platform for cooperation. It's not doing nationally, individually, rather than bring the platform of cooperation among countries, not necessarily having a agreed definition, but hope for us to be able, as a like-minded country, have be able to raise this at the level which can provide as a platform of cooperation. I know UNTOC will be very much ideal. UNTOC will be very much ideal as a basis of cooperation. But I think we have to be very realistic. that any new issue will need some time. We can wait until we have this kind of platform, but what we cannot wait is not to cooperate with it as a country to address this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are 3 questions put forward. For the panelists, anyone would like to start first? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the comment from Indonesia was very much in line with the comment from Peru.
Indonesia.
You're from Indonesia as well. Ah, okay. Sorry. What I yeah, and also the question from Namibia. Yes, from